Why, hello there, old sports, and fire has always been a very important thing to humanity. It helps us cook food, clear land, among other things. However, fire can also be used for negative things, such as, arson, I guess, and burning things. I guess that counts as arson. My general point here is that control of fire is one of the many reasons that humanity has become the dominant species on Earth. And just as fire is a useful tool in the real world for various applications, it can also be helpful in video games, or it can be only harmful. It kind of depends on which game you're playing, but in Silksong, some of the tools are fire-based. Now, to be specific, when doing the Brute or Runt Feast quest for the Huntress or her children, you are tasked with getting various organs, including seared organs, and certain tools allow you to get seared organs. Now, the three tools that allow you to earn them are the Wisp Fire Lantern, the Pimpillo, and the Flint State, which ignites your needle, allowing you to get them that way. Now, technically the Volt Vessels also allow you to get seared organs, but I feel like that counts as the electricity searing the organs into that, and it's not really fire, that's plasma, I guess, or whatever the Volt Vessels are. I'm assuming it's electricity, because, that's what the tool description says. Anyways, I will use save file editing to give myself the Flint State, Pimpillo, and Wisp Fire Lantern to start the game with, and I am only allowed to do damage via those sources. My goal is to defeat Grandmother Silk and burn Farloom down in the process, but that's kind of a secondary goal. Also, on a slightly unrelated note, did you know there's a really big difference between pyromania and arson? Arson is specifically doing something for criminal gain or financial gain or just personal gain, while pyromania is more of like an urge that you can't satisfy completely and is sometimes done with intention. Now, soon after starting the challenge, I did run into a teensy tiny little problem of the challenge being completely impossible, because what ended up happening is that I would run out of all my red tools, and then I wouldn't have any silk to use the Wisp Lantern. So to fix this problem and make the challenge video longer than 3 minutes, I decided to give myself the Weave Light blue tool, which almost acts as like a fake silk heart. It gives us an extra ring of silk regeneration, as well as speeding up silk regeneration in general. Returning to the actual run at hand, if I had to describe this challenge in one word, I would say tedious. While the Wisp Fire Lantern is completely capable of soloing the entire game if we have infinite silk from a silk heart or Weave Light, it takes forever, because unsurprisingly, the Wisp Fire Lantern doesn't do that much damage, especially when we don't have any toolkit upgrades. Now, if you want to make the fight go faster, you can always use the red tools, but they cost shell shards, and 2 of the 3 most expensive tools in terms of shell shard costs are the Flint State and Pimpillo, along with the Cogfly, but we're not using those, I just wanted to be transparent. My point here is that every shell shard is worth its weight in rosaries, and ironically enough, most of our rosaries in this challenge went towards buying shell shard bundles. Ultimately, I decided to mostly just use my red tools on arena fights and boss fights because I felt like that was where they were most needed. Then from there, I would just bite the bullet and wait for the Wisp Fire Lantern to kill any of the basic enemies to get shell shards and just to get them out of my way if needed. Upon exiting the Moss Grotto, I rushed straight towards the Marrow to get the shard pendant as quickly as possible because again, we're going to need every shell shard we can get our grubby little hands on. The Bell Beast is the first boss in this challenge that actually poses any semblance of a real threat towards us. And while yes, part of that does come down to the fact it can deal double damage, it also is because the Bell Beast is actually pretty fast for a creature of its size. On top of that, the Bell Beast is also the first boss we run into that really likes to stall, and the problem with stalling bosses in this game is that it makes our most powerful tool very hard to use optimally. The Flint State not only allows us to use our needle for a limited time, but it also makes it do 1.5 times the base damage. Now, while this effect only lasts about 8 seconds, you can get a lot done in that time, including building up enough silk to bind if you're lucky and very aggressive. But of course, the problem with the Bell Beast is that her stalling eats into those 8 seconds very quickly, and we can only carry 3 Flint States at this point in the game, so like I said, it's very hard to use them optimally. The Wisp Fire Lantern also starts to show some flaws in this fight, because while it does track, the tracking is far from perfect. and what often ends up happening is if an enemy is moving too fast, it will completely miss. And with the Bell Beast, that happens during 2 of her 3 attacks, though thankfully for her 3rd attack, the fireball will hit her as it's rising up and when it flies towards her, doing a quote-unquote double hit. Now thankfully, if you hit all of the Pimpillos, you'll do 60 damage of the Bell Beast's 150, doing 40% of her health bar, all by itself. But the important takeaway here is that our tools won't work the same for all enemies, and that needs to be accounted for. Regardless, with the defeat of the Bell Beast, we gain a new friend as well as the ability to fast travel the Bellways. And a Silk Heart, but that isn't really helpful anymore. Now, since 2 of our 3 total damage sources come from tool damage, or specifically tool damage that scales off of our crafting kits, buying more of those is very important, obviously. Then obviously on top of that, making sure we can carry more of each tool is important as well, though if I have to choose one or the other, I would choose the tool damage, because the Wisp Fire Lantern is infinite, so as long as it's doing more damage, that's the most important thing, since that's where most of our damage is coming from anyways. Now the first crafting kit upgrade we can reach is the one you can buy from the Forge Daughter, so I decided that before I fight Lace, I'll do the arena to unlock the Forge Daughter shop. Now, unfortunately, unlike in Hollow Knight, the enemies in Silksong in Arena Gauntlets don't drop any resources like shell shards or rosaries, which is really annoying because I would at least like the shell shards. However, one thing I did realize the importance of while doing this arena is that if I can get enemies to group up, I'm getting more value out of each Pimpillo. Because if I just threw one Pimpillo at one enemy, that obviously isn't spreading as much damage as it would if I hit 3 enemies with one Pimpillo. So during Arena Gauntlets, I tried my best to only use Pimpillos on groups of enemies rather than individual enemies. Thankfully, this first gauntlet isn't too difficult, and I'm able to get access to Forge Daughter, which nets me a crafting kit upgrade, as well as the ability to purchase shell shards for 50 rosaries. After buying the upgrade for my crafting kit, I decided to go fight Lace. And Lace is a very interesting boss because it kind of made me think about how to approach boss fights in this challenge, because the only bosses I had to fight before this were the Moss Mother and Bell Beast. Now, while the Bell Beast taught me how to use my tools, Lace made me think about when to use my tools. Now later on I did deviate from this strategy I'm about to explain, but I'll get to that when I get to that. But for the first half of the challenge, I decided that when I use tools, I want to make sure that I'm using those tools to finish off the boss's health bar. Because if I use all my tools at the beginning of the fight and then die, that's a bunch of tools wasted. But if I wait until the boss is already on low health to use my tools, then hopefully that will save me from wasting them more often than not. Now, I really started employing this strategy during the Lace fight because I feel like in this first encounter, she moves slow enough to where the Wisp Fire Lantern can home onto her pretty accurately. But as the fights go on and the bosses get faster, that may not always work as consistently, so I needed to keep that in mind. For this first fight with Lace, I waited to use any of my Pimpillos until she started doing her, like, flurry attack, where she has, like, the little circle light up in the middle of the arena, and then she'll kind of, like, dash around the air for a bit before slamming down. I waited until she slammed down to throw a Pimpillo there. Also, I'm not going to go over every single wish I completed just for the sake of time, but I did end up doing a lot of the just random town wishes. I didn't even do Act 3 for this challenge, I just thought, oh, this would be a good way to get some extra rosaries, because lots of those quests will end up giving you rosaries back. Or they'll give you a rosary necklace or string, yada yada yada. Another thing I'm not going to talk about for time is the amount of grinding this challenge contained, because while half the bosses went down in one attempt, the others felt like they took an eon to even get one boss fight done, so it was hit or miss. Actually, to be more accurate, most of the bosses went down in 1 or 2 attempts. It was mostly trying to get past regular enemies or just enemy gauntlets that were the real pain. Because at least I could kind of just stock up for boss fights and then just use all my tools at once and then just have to worry about grinding to get materials back later. But for the enemy gauntlets, it felt like it just felt a lot more painful. I'm not sure how to describe it even. I'd also like to point out before moving on that the 4th chorus in all of my challenge runs for Silksong has either been the easiest pushover ever or has been super annoying for no reason. Once the 4th chorus was dismantled, I made sure to stop by that little outpost in the far field with the little hut, and then I bought a tool pouch upgrade from Mort, I just felt like I should say that. And then from there I had a pretty normal trek through Greymoor until I reached the Moor Wing. Now I remember a patch or two after the game came out, this boss was nerfed, but I'm pretty sure the only thing that changed was the damage on the little claw projectile attacks. The reason I point this out is because I felt like this boss was kind of a pushover. I even managed to do it without getting hit. Though I will admit, due to how the Morwing moves, I feel like it was very susceptible to taking damage from the Wisp-Fire Lantern, so maybe it wasn't as easy as I thought. I just thought I should point that out. Now obviously after defeating the Morwing, I get access to Haunted Bellheart as well as the Shellwoods. And since the Shellwood enemies don't drop rosaries, I just decided to sprint by all of them and try to avoid them to the best of my ability. Even though they do drop shell shards, I just felt like if I'm not getting shell shards and rosaries at once, it's not worth the time. Now, even though technically I could have used my flint slate to allow myself to pogo off that one enemy to skip Sister Splinter, I decided to do the boss fight anyways. Now this fight took me about 5 or 6 attempts, when it really should have only taken 1 or 2, because Sister Splinter is very susceptible to getting double hit by the Wisp Fire Lantern fireballs. And obviously Sister Splinter herself isn't really even a problem, it's everything else about this fight that makes it terrible. First of all, the vines that shoot down from the ceiling are really annoying because they just get in your way, and this was kind of a me issue, but I didn't decide if breaking them with my needle was against the rules or not. I eventually just decided I was allowed to break them because sometimes the boss just boxes you in and you can't do anything about it, so I figured it was fine to get out of those situations. And then on top of that, the ads she summons are very annoying because not only do they take away damage from Sister Splinter, but they're also very agile, which means half the fireballs are going to miss anyways, so it's not only wasting damage by not hitting the boss, it's not even damaging anything. Thankfully though, Sister Splinter can destroy the vines and the additional enemies, so this fight isn't that bad, it's just a bit more RNG dependent than I would like. However, like I said, eventually Sister Splinter does go down, and I get access to the Wall Cling ability. Now obviously after Sister Splinter falls and we get the new ability, our next target is Widow. And Widow is a very interesting boss for this challenge, because while she is one of the faster bosses in the game, I wouldn't say she's the fastest. She just teleports around a lot, so even though she doesn't have a small hitbox, that hitbox just doesn't exist for very long periods at a time, which is really annoying when you have a slow tracking fireball that is your main source of damage. It felt like half the time she would jump out of the way of the fireballs before they would hit her, and then the other half of the time she would jump out of the way, and then jump back in the way after like 3 seconds while the fireball was still flying through the air, and it would hit her regardless. So this fight took about like twice as long as it realistically should have, because half the time the fireballs were just missing. And all the problems in this fight become much more annoying once she goes into her desperation phase, because she's moving a lot faster, she's spamming bells at you a lot more, and something else I almost forgot to mention is that sometimes when the fireball hits a bell, the bell will be redirected, so sometimes the bells are bouncing around more than they should, so you have to be keeping track of that on top of literally everything else. It's very overwhelming. Thankfully, by the time she reached the desperation phase, I felt comfortable spamming tools, and since she spends a lot of time on the ground, most of the time the pin pillows wouldn't miss anyways, and then the flint slate was also good because I could just wail on her with my nail, or needle, I keep mixing those two up, I apologize. And this next part is also definitely a me issue, but the fight feels like it drags on a lot longer when you're constantly missing, because at least if you're hitting the fireballs, it feels like you're doing damage and you're making progress, but it just feels like you've wasted time whenever you see one of the fireballs miss. It's just very mildly irritating. Anyways though, eventually Widow does go down, and I unlock the Needlin as well as freeing Bellheart from her clutches. Now after defeating Widow, I ended up taking a short break to eat some food, and when I came back I initially forgot to record for a few minutes. So all that you guys missed was that I did a few quests here and there, I upgraded my needle, and then most importantly I did the Scarecrow quest for the bar owner, and then I got the crafting kit upgrade in return, giving me 2 of the 4 upgrades. Apologies for missing that, because I felt like that stuff was important, so I just thought I would go over it real quick. Thank you, and I'm sorry again. After getting some more mask shards and getting a 6th mask, I decided to go to the Weave Nest in the Moss Grotto and then go talk to Eva to upgrade my crest. Now yes, the focus from the Hunter's Crest does not affect tool damage, but we still can use our nail if we use the Flint Slate, so if we just use the Flint Slate, build up focus, and then use it again, we'll be able to attack with the focus bar already active, therefore doing increased amounts of damage on top of the 1.5 times multiplier that you get from this Flint Slate by itself. And then before moving on to the next area, and thus Act 2, I decided to go rescue Courier Tip from that little area above where the Moss Grotto is, and from there I can now buy Shell Shard packets at the store in Bellheart, so that's always nice to have. Now I ultimately decided that the way I was going to enter the Citadel was via fighting Phantom and getting through the mist, because I prefer how that entrance to the Citadel spits you out next to the Bellway station instead of in the Underworks, because the Underworks suck. Now, while usually going through the blasted steps is a lot easier and less annoying than traversing the mist, but with this run, since we have the lantern, it actually kind of hard counters the wraiths, because you can kind of just keep jumping over their lunge attacks and then the fireballs will auto-target them and deal with them while you just stand there jumping occasionally. If anything, it was more annoying getting to the mist via exploring Sinner's Row than it was actually exploring the mist itself. Because Sinner's Road, you have to deal with all the flying enemies, and the maggot water, and the big swinging spike ball thingies. It's just annoying. Now on to the Phantom themselves. I think this boss is interesting because they're only a tiny bit slower than Widow, but they feel a lot slower when you're only paying attention to if the fireball's hitting or not. Because even though when they throw their pin, they'll actually dash towards it really quickly, for the few moments before they dash towards it, they'll actually stand still for all that time, so that gives them enough time for the fireballs to hit occasionally, though it's not always consistent. Also, this only happened a couple of times, but I just thought I should mention it. If you hit the Phantom while they're in their parry stance, or rather if the fireball from the Wisp Lantern hits them during their parry stance, the parry will still activate. So when that happened randomly, I almost got hit and I was worried it was going to happen again, so I was trying to be extra cautious, but it only happened once or twice, like I said, so it's not that big a deal. I just thought, again, I should mention it because it was kind of a funny little interaction. So since my fireballs ended up being a lot more accurate than a boss fight like Widow, this fight only took about the same amount of time considering that Phantom has higher stats. And I haven't really mentioned this much up until now, but again, our only way of binding is if we build up enough silk with the Flint Slate, and the problem is that half the time what will end up happening is that the Wisp-Fire Lantern will consume the silk before we can even bind, so we'll be stuck at 8 or 7 notches, and again, not able to bind because the Wisp-Fire Lantern ate 1 or 2 of the notches. So at least with this fight, we were only allowed to make 5 mistakes. Anything beyond that would obviously lead to us dying, so every hit we took in the fight was permanent until the fight was over. Also, thankfully, I'm really good at this boss because a while ago I tried to do a challenge where I tried to no-hit every single boss in the game, and while I didn't ever end up finishing that project, I at least beat all of the Act 1 bosses no-hit, so I had a lot of practice on Phantom. And when they do their, steam attack, where they'll shoot down a column of steam, you want to try to stay in the middle of the arena so you can move out of the way, because if you're on the right side of the arena and they do that attack on the right side of the arena, you might not be able to reach the left side in time, but I don't know if that makes any sense. However, if you keep attacking, eventually Phantom will go down and you will learn the cross-stitch skill. Now this skill is literally useless to us, so I don't even know why I'm talking about it, but that is the quote-unquote reward you get for beating this fight specifically. Anyways, after that, I take the elevator up into the Citadel and officially enter. Now, part of the reason I decided to go this route into the Citadel isn't only because it leads me straight into the Bellway, but it also gives me a straight shot towards the first shrine. If you're not doing stuff to prep for Act 3, Act 2 can feel a lot shorter than Act 1 sometimes, especially because you just have less movement abilities at the beginning of Act 1 while you have them straight off the bat in Act 2. But that's the ideal scenario, and we're not doing the ideal scenario, we're doing a challenge run, stupid! So for once, I'm actually going to reflect on my past actions and use them to be better going forward. Because the thing is, in my previous challenge runs I've done on Silksong, what would end up happening is that I would find a challenge, and then just keep throwing myself against that wall until eventually it broke. But what I could have been doing is grinding, which is a lot simpler and a lot less stressful on my mental state, and then at the end, after I spend an hour or two grinding for materials, I can just plow through any challenge ahead of me. And while grinding may be boring and tedious sometimes, at least it's different than throwing myself at the High Halls Gauntlet for 3 hours at a time. However, if we want to scavenge the Citadel for all the goodies hidden inside, and outside in some cases, we're going to need more access to the Citadel, and thus access to the Cogwork Core. And to get access to the Cogwork Core, we need to kill the Cogwork Dancers, unfortunately. Now, before actually getting into the fight itself, I would like to bring up that even getting into the arena can be annoying because the enemies in the hallway leading up to it can be very annoying to dodge sometimes, but that's not important, you just need to be careful. Now, while in Act 1, when it came to my tools, I tried to save them till the end of the encounter in cases of boss fights and gauntlet arenas. But for Act 2, I decided to go with a different strategy. That be burn it to the ground before it can move. Now, I specifically decided to start this strategy with the Cogwork Dancers because obviously in their final phase, or its final phase to be more specific, it becomes a lot slower, so it's much easier to dodge, therefore less stressful, therefore easier. And since the fireballs from the lantern can target either one of the dancers, this fight can drag out very long if you're not careful to destroy one of the dancers as quickly as possible. So my general strategy in the first 2 phases was to use 1 flint slate charge as well as a few pimpillos, and then in the final phase where they're both together, I would use 2 flint slates to try to just burn it down as quickly as possible, quite literally because fire. If you've been paying attention to the footage, you've probably already seen this, but the fire damage actually knocked one of them into the next phase while they were doing their embrace attack, and I think due to that weird interaction, it caused the fight to kind of glitch out for a moment. It didn't seem to affect the gameplay that much, it just took a moment to correct itself, but I just thought it was funny, and I know people would bring it up if I didn't say something about it, so I just wanted to talk about it, I guess. Now, once one of the Cogwork Dancers is destroyed, the fight does drag out a little bit longer, but that's just because we've used up all of our red tools at this point, and we're just waiting for the Wisp Fire Lantern to do its job. But not only is the dancer by itself now, it's also a lot slower, which makes it a lot easier to dodge and a lot less stressful. Just make sure to not be cocky and not accidentally walk into the hitbox of the dancer when you're at 2 health, because I definitely didn't do that. I definitely didn't waste 4 minutes of my life because I messed that up like a dumbass. Anyways, after enough time, the final dancer will fall, and you'll gain access to the Cogwork Core, Whispering Vaults, and the next quest to enter the Cradle. After exploring the Whispering Vaults, I make sure to grab the nearby Pale Oil and then return to Bellheart to upgrade my needle once again before fighting Trobio! Now, Trobio is actually very similar to the Bell Beast in the sense that he stalls a lot, but instead of burrowing into the ground, he hides under the floorboards of the stage. And as I said with Bell Beast, this makes it a lot harder to use our strongest tool optimally. On top of that, if we throw a Pimpillo at Trobio while he's doing his tornado attack, it will bounce off of him and then just be useless. Now, I would ask why the hell that actually works, but I'm just going to chalk this up to Trobio being more knowledgeable on pyrotechnics than I am. Now, due to how RNG reliant this fight is, especially with Trobio stalling, this fight could either take a very short time or a very long time. Because, of course, you can always just keep infinitely dodging his attacks and slowly chipping away at him with the lantern. But I'm more referring to using the Pimpillo and Flint Slate, because if you use those tools at the wrong time, they'll either be next to useless or completely useless. However, after a couple of attempts, RNG rolled in my favor, and I got lucky enough with my tools to beat Trobio in a somewhat reasonable amount of time. And with his defeat, I gain easy access to Clawline and the Architect who can sell me another toolkit upgrade. After gaining Clawline, I decided I was allowed to zip to the enemies who are specifically only placed there so you can use them as anchors for Clawline. I wasn't going to use it for combat, but I'm also not going to pretend like those enemies aren't just glorified platforms. After that, I got 2 of the 3 Architect Melody thirds, leaving only the Conductor's Melody left. Now, before taking on the High Halls arena, there were 2 things I wanted to do first that would make the gauntlet much easier. Those 2 things were to get the final toolkit upgrade, as well as disabling the Claw Maiden spiders. Now, the thing about those 2 objectives are that they both require the Faydown Cloak. And as the footage has been playing in the background for like the last 40 seconds, I'm sure you can tell that I'm doing Mount Fay. Now, as I climb, I want to explain something that I think is really interesting. If you use the flint slate while you're climbing or just in the frosty area, you'll actually won't progress the freezing timer and it actually resets to 0 because the thing's on fire and it's keeping you warm. But more interestingly, the Wisp Fire Lantern also has a similar effect. Now this may be obvious because it's a lantern, but you can't actually even reach the Wisp Fire Lantern until you have the Fade Down Cloak, and having the Fade Down Cloak protects you from the frost itself. So I'm not sure why Team Cherry even programmed that little interaction in, but regardless, I think it kind of just shows how much polish and love and care was put into Silksong. Anyways, as I said, I was allowing myself to use Claw Line on the floating enemies because they're only there for that exact purpose, but I wasn't allowed to fight any enemies with the Claw Line in the future. Now, funnily enough, having the Wisp Fire Lantern was simultaneously a problem and a solution, because it kept me warm, meaning I wasn't taking freezing damage, but it also would occasionally kill the floating enemies, meaning I would have to stall in the air for a while until it came back, and that made platforming a little annoying sometimes, but I was able to get past it, and eventually I reached the peak of Mount Fey and got the Fade Down Cloak. Once the Fade Down Cloak was in my possession, I returned to the Grand Bellway, and then to the Coral Chambers to grind for rosaries, and just shell shards in general, because I knew I would need them. The only crafting kit upgrade I don't have right now is the one held by Grindel in the Blasted Steppes, and that greedy little bastard is going to charge me 700 rosaries for it. Now, upon leaving Mount Fey, I had almost enough rosaries to buy the Thief's Mark from him. The Mark is a yellow tool that allows you to gain more rosaries as long as you don't get hit, and honestly at this point I've had enough practice not getting hit, so I found a group of 2 enemies that I could easily kill over and over, grinding rosaries until I had enough to buy the last toolkit upgrade. Now, would I have probably saved some time if I just never got the Thief's Mark and just grinded straight for the toolkit upgrade? Probably, but there's not really much I can do about it now, so I'm going to do what I can to justify that decision to myself. Since I wasn't sure how many more rosaries I was going to need for the rest of this run, I decided to just buy all the extra stuff I didn't know if I was going to need or not, just to be safe. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get an 8th mask, but I did get a 7th mask before this, so I'm not that bad on health. Only mostly bad. Now, funnily enough, I managed to defeat the High Halls Gauntlet on my first try, but it was very close, and it was only because I had a strategy going into the room first, because honestly I feel like if I didn't go in with a plan, this probably would have taken me a lot longer. Also, I feel like my whole strategy worked because I prepared a bunch, and it only took me 1 try, so look at me making good decisions for once. Now, I tried my best to save my red tools for only 2 types of enemies, those being the Maestros and the Choir Clappers. When I was running through the high halls to actually reach the gauntlet and I ran into the Maestros, I realized that the cogflies that surrounded them would draw the aggro of the fireballs, making it very hard to actually hit the Maestro itself, and the Maestro can always call more cogflies if the other ones get destroyed. Now, thankfully, with all of our upgrades, a Maestro goes down to 2 Pimpillos, and the explosion is big enough to reach past the cogflies if it hits that before the Maestro itself. Now, I wouldn't do this to every Maestro to save on Pimpillos. I would just make sure that if there were 2 enemies, there would only be 1 at that point. So there's 1 wave where there's 2 Maestros that spawn, so I would get rid of 1 of them, and then there's 1 wave where 1 Maestro spawns as long as another enemy, so I just made sure to burn down the Maestro and then just deal with the other enemy by itself. Now, the Choir Clappers are by far the most dangerous enemy in this whole gauntlet, so I wanted to make sure to take care of them as quickly as possible, especially when there's 2 of them at once, so I tried to save my flint slates for that so I could just destroy them as quickly as possible, and hopefully bind in the process if I needed to. Otherwise, when it came to the other fodder enemies, I just tried my best to dodge and let the Wisp Fire Lantern take care of them. Like I said, I managed to beat this on my first try only because I had a plan and because I was prepared going into it. But even then, I still almost died. It was very close. If I only took 1 more hit, I would have been done and I would have had to try again. And it also didn't help that I was getting really low on shell shards at this point, so it easily could have spiraled into this taking a lot longer because I would have had to go grind for more shell shards in between each attempt. Regardless, once the room opens up, I'm able to find the conductor and learn the final part of the melody. From there, I can return to where I fought the cogwork dancers and ascend into the cradle to find the final 2 bosses. Now before actually entering the elevator to the cradle, I made sure to spend all my rosaries on shell shard bundles so I would always have enough in case I needed them. Now surprisingly, even though I accidentally walked off the ledge into the steam 20 seconds into the fight, I managed to defeat Lace 2 on my first try yet again, just like the High Halls Gauntlet. Now part of this is definitely because we have full tool upgrades on an Act 2 boss, when these tool upgrades are probably balanced around Act 3 to be completely honest, because Lace in the Cradle only has 800 health, and the pin pillows we throw at her, if we land all of them, which I did, it ends up doing about 45% of her health bar just from those alone. Add on to that the flint slate, add on to that the wisp fire lantern, hell, even add on the burning. And this fight isn't actually that bad, which is incredibly impressive because I was actually throwing this whole fight. I don't know how I was playing. I didn't use the flint slate until the battle was almost over, wasting a lot of time. I missed half my pin pillows, and just like her sister, when you hit the fireball when she's doing the parry, it actually triggers the parry, so that also wasted time because I hit that a lot more than I did with Phantom. I guess ultimately, once you spend a couple hours of your life throwing yourself against Lost Lace and dying over and over, you get used to how she moves, even in her slower, weaker versions, so I guess that just helped me learn her moveset just in general. Then on top of that, I was doing pretty good passive damage just from the Wisp Fire Lantern, so since I already knew how to dodge almost flawlessly, I was actually doing pretty good, so the few mistakes I made weren't able to screw me over that much. But I don't know, I'm just talking too much at this point, but then again, that's why you watch these videos, so I'm not sure if I should shut up or not. I'm actually gonna shut up now and move on to Grandmother Silk, because again, like I said, I beat this boss on my first try. Hopefully her mother does not follow the same path. You gotta be fucking with me, man. Why are you such a pushover, Grandmother Silk? Why? Why are you just not difficult whatsoever? I understand your purpose is just to be the gatekeeper to Act 3, but like, come on, man, put up more of a fight. Just like Sister Splinter, since Grandmother Silk is always positioned right above us, she's very susceptible to getting double hit by the Wisp Fire Lantern. On top of that, since she doesn't have a passive hitbox when she isn't attacking, it's very easy to just jump into her and then throw pin pillows, so it's really hard to miss if you're just not being stupid. Anyways, yet again, Lace 2 is more of a challenge than her mother in terms of putting up a fight. Who could have seen that coming? Anyways, with that anticlimactic ending, the challenge is over, and I have proven that yes, you can beat Hollow Knight Silksong with only using fire damage. I'm gonna be honest, I was working on a completely different video to this one for a bit, but then I kinda lost interest, and then I realized it wasn't coming together very well, so I kinda just shelved it. And I kinda just decided to work on this video on a whim, and I've actually really liked working on this video. I had a lot of fun making it. So, if you have any other challenge ideas for Silksong you'd like to see me try, I'd love to give some a whirl. I had this idea for a series that was like, which crest is the best? And what I would do is I would start myself out with the crest from the beginning of the game and then be Act 3 and just see how it went, and I'd make one video on each crest. So if you think that idea has potential, please share your thoughts down in the comments below. On top of that, I would like to thank my 3 YouTube channel members, Sven Biscuit, Amara98, and Wally69420, as well as my single Patreon member, Somebody. Yes, that is their name. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching and giving me some of your time today. It means the world to me, and I couldn't keep doing this without all of your guys' support. Like I said, it means everything to me. Thank you. So, I hope you have a good day, and good night.